London, 1852. The Earl of Harrington's study was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, but for Zachary Yates, it had become a prison. Rain lashed against the windows as he stared at the scattered papers before him, ledgers, bank notes, and the damning letter from his solicitor. "I'm afraid there's no other option, my lord," Mr. Finch said, his voice carrying the gravity of a funeral director. "The estate requires an immediate influx of capital or Harrington Hall will be lost before winter." Zachary's fingers traced the edge of the desk, worn smooth by generations of Yates men who had never faced such catastrophe. "My father managed these lands for 30 years without difficulty. Your father, God rest his soul, did not inherit the debts of his predecessor," Mr. Finch replied delicately. "Nor did he invest heavily in the failed Northern Railway venture." The word stung like salt in an open wound. Zachary had been Earl for merely 8 months, sufficient time to discover the precarious financial situation his cousin had left behind, but insufficient to remedy it. "What of the timber on the north side?" he asked, grasping at possibilities. "Already accounted for, my lord. It will cover the servants' wages through autumn, nothing more." Zachary rose, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the Persian carpet. At 32, he had never expected to inherit the earldom. As a second cousin to the previous Earl, who had died without issue, Zachary had been summoned from his military commission in India to assume a title and responsibility he had never wanted. "There is one solution, Lord Harrington," Mr. Finch ventured, clearing his throat. "A matrimonial alliance." "A marriage of convenience," Zachary translated bluntly. "You suggest I sell my name to save my land?" "I suggest you consider the daughters of certain industrialists who would value a connection to nobility. The Merryweathers, for instance, have a daughter of marriageable age and a fortune from their cotton mills that would restore Harrington 10 times over." Zachary turned to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "And what of the Yates family motto? Honor before all else?" "With respect, my lord, there will be no family honor left to uphold if Harrington passes to creditors." That evening, the London season in full swing, Zachary found himself in the glittering ballroom of Lord and Lady Pembroke, surrounded by the elite of society who remained blissfully unaware of his financial predicament. Crystal chandeliers cast their golden light upon silk gowns and jeweled tiaras while a string quartet played a waltz. "The Earl of Harrington," the butler announced as Zachary entered, and heads turned toward him with polite interest. He nodded curtly, scanning the room for the Merryweathers. His gaze instead caught on a woman standing apart from the crowd, observing the proceedings with what appeared to be mild amusement rather than the desperate eagerness of most unmarried ladies. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, modest compared to the elaborate confection surrounding her. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply, with no ostentatious ornaments save a single pearl comb. But it was her expression, intelligent, slightly sardonic, that held his attention. "Lady Pembroke," he greeted his hostess with a bow. "Might I inquire who that lady is?" "In the green gown." Lady Pembroke followed his gaze and her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Ah, that is Miss Theodora Osborne. The daughter of Sir Harold Osborne. She acts as companion to her great-aunt, Lady Winthrop." She leaned closer. "A respectable family, but of modest means. She's been on the marriage mart for 3 seasons now. Considered rather opinionated for most gentlemen's tastes." "Indeed?" Zachary found himself intrigued rather than deterred. "Would you be so kind as to introduce us?" Minutes later, he bowed before Miss Osborne, noting that her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, like fine whiskey in crystal. "My lord," she curtsied, her voice melodious but with an undertone of wariness. "To what do I owe this honor? I believe this is the first time you've noticed my existence in 3 London seasons." Her directness startled him into a genuine smile. "I've only recently returned from India, Miss Osborne. Had I been present for those seasons, I assure you, I would have noticed." "How diplomatic of you." Her lips curved slightly. "Though I suspect your sudden interest has some purpose beyond mere social pleasantry." Before he could respond, a commotion arose near the entrance. The Merryweathers had arrived, father, mother, and daughter, in a display of wealth as subtle as a cannon shot. Miss Merryweather's gown sparkled with so many crystals she appeared to be wearing a chandelier. "Ah," said Miss Osborne softly, following his gaze. "I see your purpose now. You've been advised to seek the Merryweather fortune, but wish to pass the time with less significant prey first." Zachary turned back to her, startled by her perception. "You mistake me, Miss Osborne." "Do I?" Her amber eyes held his steadily. "The financial difficulties of Harrington are whispered about in servants' halls, my lord, and Miss Merryweather has been paraded before every titled bachelor this season. It requires no great deduction." Before he could defend himself, Lady Winthrop appeared beside her great niece, a tiny, ancient woman with piercing blue eyes and a spine as straight as a ramrod despite her 90 years. "Theodora, dear, I find myself fatigued. We must depart." She eyed Zachary with undisguised scrutiny. "Lord Harrington, I presume? I knew your grandfather. A man of impeccable character." The statement carried the clear implication that the jury was still out on Zachary himself. "Lady Winthrop," he bowed deeply. "It's an honor to meet you." "Indeed," she said dryly. "Theodora, come along." As Miss Osborne curtsied in farewell, Zachary found himself saying, "Perhaps you would permit me to call upon you tomorrow, Miss Osborne? I should like to continue our conversation." She regarded him with surprise. Rather than pursue Miss Merryweather and her £40,000 per annum. How curious. A small smile touched her lips. "We reside at Lady Winthrop's home on Berkeley Square. Good evening, Lord Harrington." As they departed, Zachary realized he had completely forgotten about the Merryweathers. Miss Osborne's forthright manner had been like a breath of fresh air after months of stifling politeness and hidden agendas. But the estate's needs remained paramount. With a sigh, he turned to seek an introduction to the Merryweathers, only to find Mr. Finch hurrying toward him with an expression of alarm. "My lord," he said urgently, "I've just received word. There's been a fire at the tenant cottages on the Harrington estate." The Merryweathers were instantly forgotten as Zachary departed for Harrington Hall that very night. 3 days later, Theodora Osborne was in Lady Winthrop's library, reading aloud from the morning newspaper. Devastating fire at Harrington estate destroys 6 tenant cottages. The Earl of Harrington, newly returned from India, personally led efforts to rescue families and livestock, sustaining injuries in the process. She paused, concern crossing her features. "How serious are these injuries, I wonder?" Lady Winthrop asked, her gnarled hands working at her embroidery. "The article doesn't specify," Theodora replied, continuing to read. "The Earl has promised to rebuild all dwellings before winter and has opened Harrington Hall to displaced families in the interim." "Interesting," Lady Winthrop murmured. "Opening one's home to tenants is hardly common practice among the nobility these days. Perhaps the current Earl is cut from different cloth than most of his peers. Or perhaps it's a calculated display of noblesse oblige to enhance his appeal to potential heiresses," Theodora suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. The man she had met briefly did not strike her as calculating. Lady Winthrop's blue eyes twinkled. "You've grown cynical for one so young, my dear. 3 seasons in London society would make anyone cynical, Aunt Agatha," Theodora replied with a wry smile. "Particularly when one's dowry is modest and one's opinions are not." The butler entered, bearing a silver salver. "A letter for Miss Osborne, my lady." Theodora took the envelope, noting the Harrington crest in the wax seal with surprise. Breaking it open, she read quickly, her eyebrows rising. "It's from Lord Harrington," she said, bewildered. "He apologizes for not calling as promised and invites us both to Harrington Hall for a fortnight's stay. He mentions that Lady Ellis, whom you know, I believe, will be acting as hostess, so all propriety will be observed." Lady Winthrop set aside her embroidery. "Does he indeed? How very interesting. Surely you don't wish to accept?" Theodora asked, startled. "I most certainly do," Lady Winthrop declared. "Country air will do me good, and I find I'm curious about this Earl who rescues tenants and opens his ancestral home to them. Besides, she added with a shrewd glance at her great-niece, he seemed quite taken with you at the Pembroke ball. He seemed quite taken with the idea of Miss Merryweather's fortune, Theodora corrected. Any attention paid to me was merely a diversion while he gathered his courage to approach her. Then why invite you to his estate? Lady Winthrop challenged. Theodora had no answer for that. 1 week later, the Harrington carriage delivered them to the impressive facade of Harrington Hall, a Tudor mansion with later Georgian additions that sprawled gracefully amidst ancient oaks and formal gardens. Footmen in the Harrington livery of deep blue and silver hastened to assist them. As they entered the grand entrance hall, Theodora was struck by the evidence of both wealth and neglect. The marble floors gleamed, but the tapestries on the walls were faded. The silver sconces were polished to brilliance, but the furniture showed signs of wear. Lord Harrington himself came to greet them, his tall figure somewhat gaunt compared to their first meeting. A bandage was visible at his temple, and he carried his left arm stiffly, confirming the newspaper's report of his injuries. Lady Winthrop, Miss Osborne, he bowed, wincing slightly at the movement. You honor me with your presence. Lady Winthrop appraised him with her direct gaze. You look as though you've been through battle, Lord Harrington. Nothing so valorous as battle, my lady, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Merely a burning roof beam that had the audacity to fall on me. Theodora felt a surge of respect for his modesty. The newspaper reported you saved a child. The newspaper exaggerated, as newspapers are wont to do, he said dismissively. I merely carried young Timothy Cooper from the stable when the fire spread. Any man would have done the same. But Theodora had seen how most men of his class viewed their tenants as living extensions of their property, to be managed rather than risked one's life for. Lady Ellis awaits you in the blue drawing-room, he continued, and will show you to your chambers. I hope you'll forgive me if I don't join you for tea. There are matters requiring my attention regarding the rebuilding efforts. As they followed a footman toward the drawing-room, Theodora glanced back to see Zachary deep in conversation with his steward, his expression grave as he examined what appeared to be architectural drawings. Lady Ellis proved to be a pleasant widow in her 50s, a distant cousin of the Earl who occasionally acted as his hostess. Over tea, she explained that several other guests would arrive in the coming days for a small house party. Including the Merryweathers, she added, with a meaningful glance at Lady Winthrop that Theodora pretended not to notice. That evening, dressed for dinner in her best gown, a silvery blue silk that had been remodeled 3 times since its original creation, Theodora descended the grand staircase to find Lord Harrington waiting in the entrance hall. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. He wore formal evening attire, the black tailcoat emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. Miss Osborne, he said, his voice warm. That shade of blue suits you admirably. Thank you, my lord, she replied, determined to maintain her composure despite the unwelcome flutter in her chest. How are your injuries faring? Well enough, he said, offering his arm to escort her to the drawing-room. Though they prevent me from demonstrating my mediocre dancing skills, I fear. A blessing in disguise for your potential partners, perhaps, she quipped, then immediately worried she had overstepped. But he laughed, a rich sound that transformed his serious face. You wound me, Miss Osborne. But fairly, I concede. In the drawing-room, they were joined by Lady Winthrop, Lady Ellis, the local vicar and his wife, and the neighbouring baronet with his sister. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with conversation flowing easily among the small group. Theodora found herself seated beside Lord Harrington, who proved to be an attentive host despite his earlier claim of pressing business. He drew her into conversation about books, revealing a well-read mind and thoughtful opinions that surprised her. You expected me to be an illiterate soldier, he asked when she expressed her surprise at his familiarity with Elizabeth Barrett Browning's works. I expected you to be like most gentlemen of my acquaintance, who consider poetry the domain of women and scholars, not men of action, she replied honestly. India provides ample time for reading during the monsoon season, he said. And I find poetry speaks truths that ordinary language cannot. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room while the gentlemen remained for port. Lady Ellis seized the opportunity to share the latest gossip about the expected guests. The Merryweathers arrive tomorrow, she informed them, along with Lord and Lady Petersham and their daughter. I understand Miss Merryweather's dowry is quite substantial. £40,000, Lady Winthrop confirmed. Though I hear her accomplishments are somewhat less substantial. Can she even read, I wonder? Aunt Agatha, Theodora admonished gently. That's unkind. It's a legitimate question, Lady Winthrop insisted. What good is a wealthy wife if she cannot converse intelligently or manage a household? Money may repair a roof, but it cannot sustain a marriage. When the gentleman rejoined them, Zachary approached Theodora, who had moved to examine a portrait over the fireplace. My grandfather, he explained, nodding toward the stern-faced man in the painting. The paragon Lady Winthrop remembers. You resemble him, Theodora observed. Though perhaps with a kinder mouth. I'll take that as a compliment, he said. Would you care to see the library? I recall your interest in books. The Harrington Library was a magnificent room spanning 2 floors, with galleries and ladders providing access to the highest shelves. Gas lamps cast a warm glow over leather-bound volumes and comfortable reading nooks. This is wonderful, Theodora breathed, her eyes alight with pleasure. I could happily spend a lifetime here. You're welcome to explore it during your stay, Zachary offered. Few of my guests take much interest in it, I'm afraid. Few of your guests can read beyond a menu card and a dance program, I suspect, she replied, then covered her mouth. Forgive me. That was inexcusably rude. But Zachary was laughing again. Refreshingly honest, rather. Though I should warn you that Miss Merryweather allegedly reads 3 languages and plays the harp like an angel. Allegedly, Theodora repeated with a small smile. You sound skeptical. I've learned to question glowing reports of young ladies' accomplishments, he said dryly. Particularly when they come from ambitious mammas. Yet you've invited her here, Theodora pointed out, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. One might conclude you have matrimonial intentions. Zachary was quiet for a moment, studying her profile in the lamplight. One might, he finally agreed. But one might be mistaken about which guest has captured my interest. Before Theodora could process this statement, Lady Ellis appeared in the doorway. Ah, there you are. Lady Winthrop is retiring and wishes to bid you good night, Miss Osborne. The following day brought the arrival of the other guests, including the Merryweathers. Miss Merryweather, Amelia, was a pretty, plump young woman with a perpetual expression of wide-eyed wonder, as though she found the world continually surprising. Miss Osborne, she greeted Theodora warmly. How delightful to meet you. Are you enjoying your stay? Isn't Harrington Hall magnificent? Have you seen the Rose Garden yet? It's said to be the finest in the county. Her enthusiastic friendliness made it impossible for Theodora to dislike her, despite her intention to do so. By afternoon tea, she found herself genuinely charmed by Amelia's good nature, if somewhat exhausted by her constant exclamations. The weather was fine, so Lord Harrington proposed a walk through the gardens. Theodora watched as he dutifully offered his arm to Miss Merryweather, who fluttered her eyelashes and declared herself positively overcome by the beauty of the rhododendrons. Lady Winthrop, seated beside Theodora on a stone bench, observed the parade of couples with amusement. Miss Merryweather seems determined to secure her Earl, she remarked. Though our host appears less enthusiastic about the pursuit. Indeed, Zachary's expression as he listened to Amelia's chatter was one of polite forbearance rather than captivation. Several times, Theodora caught him glancing in her direction. That evening, after changing for dinner, Theodora found herself alone in a corridor gallery, examining a series of landscape paintings. Footsteps approached, and she turned to find Zachary watching her. You discovered my great-grandmother's watercolors, he said, coming to stand beside her. She was remarkably talented. These are lovely, Theodora agreed. She captured the light beautifully. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Zachary spoke again. I noticed you avoided the archery contest this afternoon. I thought it best, she admitted. My skills with a bow are rather dangerous to innocent bystanders. Unlike Miss Merriweather, who hit the target every time, he observed. She's surprisingly accomplished, Theodora agreed. Though her mother's triumphant expression each time she scored suggested intensive coaching. Zachary laughed. You've noticed that too? I suspect poor Amelia has been drilled in every accomplishment deemed suitable for ensnaring an earl. You sound sympathetic toward her. I am, he said seriously. She's a pawn in her parents' social ambitions, just as I'm a pawn in the game of financial necessity. The frank admission startled Theodora. You speak openly of your situation. To you, yes. His eyes held hers steadily. I find I can speak truthfully with you in a way I cannot with others. You see through pretense, Miss Osborne. Theodora, she said impulsively. If we're to speak truthfully, you might use my given name. When we're alone, that is. Theodora, he repeated, the name warm on his lips. And I am Zachary to you, when we're alone. The dinner gong sounded, breaking the moment. With a small bow, he offered his arm to escort her downstairs. The dinner party that evening was larger and more formal than the previous night. Theodora found herself seated between Mr. Merriweather and Lord Petersham, while Zachary was obliged to sit between Mrs. Merriweather and Lady Petersham, both of whom clearly had matrimonial designs on him for their daughters. Mr. Merriweather, a bluff, red-faced man who had made his fortune in cotton mills, spoke enthusiastically about production numbers and profit margins throughout the first 3 courses. By the fish, Theodora's polite smile had become fixed in place. Of course, what Amelia brings to a marriage isn't just money, he declared, lowering his voice conspiratorially. She's been raised to manage a grand household. Knows all about inventories and servant schedules and such. Not like some gels who just read novels all day. Theodora thought of the well-worn copy of Jane Eyre tucked into her traveling case and suppressed a smile. How fortunate for her future husband, she murmured. Across the table, she could see Zachary enduring a similar recitation of feminine virtues from Mrs. Merriweather, his expression politely neutral though his eyes occasionally met Theodora's with a glint of shared amusement. After dinner, entertainment was provided by the young ladies of the party. Miss Petersham performed a complex piano piece with technical precision but little feeling. Amelia Merriweather followed with a sweet, if somewhat thin, rendition of an Italian aria. Miss Osborne, won't you favor us? Lady Ellis urged when Amelia had finished. I'm afraid I don't play or sing, Theodora admitted without embarrassment. My talents lie elsewhere. Miss Osborne is a gifted conversationalist, Zachary interjected. And has a remarkable memory for poetry. Perhaps you might recite something for us? Put on the spot, Theodora hesitated, then nodded. If you wish. She moved to stand near the fireplace and, after a moment's thought, began to recite Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese, her voice clear and expressive. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. As she spoke the familiar lines, her eyes inadvertently found Zachary's, and the intensity of his gaze made her falter momentarily before recovering. When she finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat before applause broke out. Beautifully done, Lady Winthrop declared proudly. Indeed, Zachary agreed, his eyes still on Theodora. Most affecting. The following morning brought rain, confining the party to indoor activities. Theodora slipped away to the library, hoping for solitude. She found instead Lord Harrington, seated at a desk surrounded by ledgers and papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. Forgive me, she said, turning to leave. I didn't mean to intrude. No intrusion, he assured her, rising quickly. I was merely reviewing some estate matters. Please, come in. She approached cautiously, noting the strain in his face. You look troubled. He sighed, gesturing to the papers. The fire has complicated an already difficult financial situation. The cost of rebuilding the cottages, while necessary, will deplete what little reserves remain. Hence Miss Merriweather, Theodora said softly. Hence Miss Merriweather, he agreed, his expression grim. Though I find the prospect increasingly distasteful. She seems a kind person, Theodora offered. Perhaps affection might grow in time. Perhaps. He moved to stand beside her near the window, where rain streaked the glass like tears. But I find myself wondering if saving the estate is worth sacrificing the possibility of a deeper connection. His eyes met hers, and Theodora felt her breath catch. What sort of connection? The kind where minds meet as equals, he said quietly. Where conversation is a joy rather than an obligation. Where respect forms the foundation of deeper feelings. That sounds like a description from a novel, she said, trying to keep her tone light despite the rapid beating of her heart. Does it? He smiled faintly. Then perhaps novelists understand more about happiness than those who arrange marriages based on acreage and dowries. Before she could respond, the library door opened, and Amelia Merryweather entered, followed closely by her mother. Oh! Lord Harrington! Here you are! Amelia exclaimed. Mamma said you promised to show me the family portraits in the long gallery. Zachary's expression shifted seamlessly to polite host. Indeed I did, Miss Merryweather. If you'll excuse me, Miss Osborne. Of course, Theodora murmured, watching as Mrs. Merryweather placed her daughter's hand possessively on Zachary's arm. When they had gone, Theodora moved to the desk, curious about the papers that had caused such concern. The topmost document was a letter from a bank, mentioning foreclosure proceedings and 90 days' notice. Beside it lay architectural drawings for the new tenant cottages, with annotations in Zachary's handwriting emphasizing quality materials and proper ventilation. He was spending money he didn't have to ensure his tenants were properly housed, even as he faced losing his ancestral home. That evening, a violent thunderstorm swept over Harrington Hall, rattling windows and sending nervous ladies into fits of distress. Amelia Merryweather shrieked at each thunderclap, while her mother suggested that Lord Harrington might comfort her. Zachary, however, was noticeably absent from the drawing-room. Unable to bear another of Amelia's theatrics, Theodora slipped out into the corridor. On impulse, she made her way back to the library, drawn by some intuition. There she found Zachary, standing by the window watching the storm, a glass of brandy in his hand. You're missing Miss Merryweather's performance as the frightened damsel, she said, closing the door behind her. He turned, surprise giving way to pleasure at the sight of her. Is that what it is? I thought perhaps a banshee had gotten loose in the drawing-room. Theodora laughed, moving to stand beside him at the window. I shouldn't laugh. She's genuinely frightened, I think. And her mother is genuinely opportunistic, he observed dryly. I half expected her to suggest I hold Amelia in my arms to calm her nerves. The night is young, Theodora quipped. The suggestion may yet come. Outside, lightning illuminated the formal gardens, followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Theodora flinched involuntarily. You're not fond of storms either, Zachary noted. I don't mind them usually, she admitted. But this one seems particularly fierce. As if in agreement, another bolt of lightning struck with a deafening crack, and the library plunged into darkness as the gas lamps extinguished. It must have hit near the main gas line, Zachary said, his voice calm in the darkness. Are you all right? Yes, Theodora replied, though her heart was racing. She felt his hand find hers, warm and reassuring. Stay here, he instructed. I'll find candles. She heard him moving across the room, followed by the sound of drawers opening. A moment later, the scratch of a match illuminated his face as he lit a candle, then another, placing them in holders on the mantelpiece. Better, he asked, returning to her side. The candlelight cast a warm glow around them, creating an intimate circle that seemed separate from the rest of the world. Theodora was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the flickering light defined the strong lines of his face. Yes, thank you, she managed. Should we rejoin the others? In a moment, he said, making no move toward the door. First, I need to tell you something. Her pulse quickened. What is it? I decided not to offer for Miss Merryweather, he said quietly. Regardless of the consequences. Theodora stared at him in surprise. But the estate may be lost, he acknowledged. But I find I cannot marry without affection, even to save Harrington. That's admirably principled, she said carefully. But what will you do? I don't know yet, he admitted. But whatever the future holds, I'd like to face it with someone who sees me as more than a title and an estate. Someone who challenges my thinking and makes me laugh. Someone like you, Theodora. The directness of his declaration left her momentarily speechless. In the silence, he took her hand again, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. I know it's sudden, he continued. We've known each other only a short time. But I feel a connection with you that I've never experienced before. I'm not asking for promises now, only the chance to explore what might develop between us. Theodora found her voice at last. What of society's expectations? I have no fortune to save Harrington. I care increasingly less for society's expectations, he replied with a wry smile. And as for Harrington, perhaps there are solutions we haven't yet considered. Before she could respond, the library door burst open, and servants appeared with lamps, followed by the concerned faces of Lady Ellis and Lady Winthrop. There you are! Lady Ellis exclaimed. We've been searching everywhere. Are you both all right? Perfectly fine, Zachary assured them, reluctantly releasing Theodora's hand. We were simply waiting out the storm. Lady Winthrop's shrewd eyes darted between them, noting their proximity and the high color in Theodora's cheeks. Indeed, she said, in a tone that suggested she understood perfectly what had been transpiring. Well, the rest of the party has moved to the small salon, where a fire has been lit. Perhaps you would care to join us. The interruption broke the spell of the moment, and Theodora found herself being swept along back to the company, with no opportunity to respond to Zachary's declaration. The remainder of the evening passed in strained politeness, with Mrs. Merriweather making increasingly obvious attempts to place Amelia in Zachary's path. For his part, Zachary maintained courteous attention to all his guests, though his eyes frequently sought Theodora's across the room. Late that night, unable to sleep, Theodora sat by her bedroom window watching the storm gradually subside. A soft knock at her door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Lady Winthrop in her dressing gown, a candle in hand. "May I come in, my dear?" the elderly lady asked. "I find my old bones won't let me rest tonight." Once settled in the armchair by the fire, Lady Winthrop fixed her great-niece with a penetrating stare. "Lord Harrington has developed a tendre for you," she stated without preamble. Theodora flushed. "You're very direct, Aunt Agatha." "At my age, one hasn't time for circumlocution," Lady Winthrop replied crisply. "The question is, do you return his regard?" "I find him unlike any gentleman I've known," Theodora admitted. "He's thoughtful, intelligent, and genuinely concerned for others. But his situation is precarious, and I have no fortune to assist him." "Money," Lady Winthrop waved dismissively. "Is that all young people think of these days? There are more important foundations for marriage." "The world doesn't run on sentiment, Aunt," Theodora said gently. "Without funds, Harrington Hall will be lost, and with it, the livelihoods of dozens of tenant families." Lady Winthrop's eyes twinkled mysteriously. "Perhaps the situation isn't as dire as it appears. Now, tell me truthfully, do you care for him?" In the quiet of the night, Theodora couldn't dissemble. "Yes," she whispered. "More than I thought possible in so short a time." "Then that's all that matters," Lady Winthrop declared, rising with surprising agility. "The rest will sort itself out. Trust your great-aunt in this." With those cryptic words, she departed, leaving Theodora more confused than ever. The following morning brought sunshine and the unexpected announcement that Lady Winthrop had invited Mr. Finch, Lord Harrington's solicitor, to join them for luncheon. The Merriweathers were visibly displeased by this development, particularly when Lady Winthrop insisted that business matters be discussed at the table. "My dear Lord Harrington," she began once the soup had been served, "I understand you are facing some financial difficulties regarding the estate." A strained silence fell over the table. Zachary's jaw tightened, but he responded with composure. "That's not a subject for the luncheon table, Lady Winthrop." "Nonsense," she replied cheerfully. "We're among friends here. Mr. Finch, perhaps you could enlighten us as to the specific amount needed to clear the debts and restore Harrington to solvency." The solicitor glanced nervously at his employer, who nodded reluctantly. "Approximately £30,000 would address the immediate concerns, my lady. Though additional funds would be required for long-term improvements." "I see," Lady Winthrop nodded thoughtfully. "And the property itself, the land, the house, the various holdings, what would you estimate their value to be, if properly managed?" "Lady Winthrop," Zachary interrupted, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is neither the time nor the place, humor an old woman," she insisted. "Mr. Finch." The solicitor cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The Harrington estates, if unencumbered by debt and properly managed, would yield perhaps £8,000 to £10,000 annually. The total value would be several £100,000. Mrs. Merriweather's eyes gleamed with renewed interest, while her husband nodded approvingly. "As I suspected," Lady Winthrop said, setting down her soup spoon. "Now, Lord Harrington, I have a proposition for you. I wish to invest £35,000 in the Harrington estates as a business arrangement. In return, I would expect a reasonable interest on my investment to be paid annually once the estates are generating proper income again." Stunned silence greeted this announcement. Zachary stared at Lady Winthrop in disbelief. "You wish to invest in Harrington?" "Yes," she confirmed calmly. "I have been looking for sound investments for some time. Mr. Finch can draw up the necessary paperwork this afternoon, if that suits you." "But I don't understand," Zachary said, glancing between Lady Winthrop and Theodora, who appeared equally shocked. "Why would you do this?" Lady Winthrop's eyes softened. "Because I believe in investing in character, Lord Harrington. I've observed how you treat your tenants, your servants, and your guests. I've seen your commitment to doing what is right, even at personal cost. Such qualities are worth supporting." She turned to Theodora with a fond smile. "Besides, my great-niece seems to hold you in high regard, and her judgment of character has always been excellent." The Merriweathers' expressions had soured considerably. Mrs. Merriweather leaned toward her husband, whispering urgently. He nodded and cleared his throat. "Well, this has been most illuminating," he declared, rising from the table. "But I find we must cut our visit short. Business in London requires my immediate attention." Within the hour, the Merriweathers' carriage was being loaded for departure. The Petershams, sensing that the purpose of the gathering had fundamentally changed, announced their intention to leave the following day. By evening, the house party had dwindled to just Lady Winthrop, Theodora, and Lady Ellis, who tactfully retired early, leaving the others alone in the drawing-room. "You've orchestrated this entire situation, haven't you?" Theodora asked her great-aunt once they were alone. "From accepting the invitation to arranging for Mr. Finch to appear today." Lady Winthrop smiled serenely. "I merely created the conditions for truth to emerge. Lord Harrington needed to see that there were options beyond selling himself into a loveless marriage." "But £35,000!" Theodora exclaimed. "I had no idea you possessed such wealth." "Your grandfather, my brother, was an excellent investor," Lady Winthrop explained. "And I have lived modestly on the interest for decades. It's time the capital was put to good use. Still, to risk such a sum—" "It's hardly a risk," Lady Winthrop said confidently. "Harrington is fundamentally sound, just poorly managed by the previous Earl. And I have great faith in the current one's character and intelligence." She patted Theodora's hand. "Besides, I'm investing in your happiness as much as in his estate." "You assume much about my feelings," Theodora murmured, though she couldn't hide her smile. "I assume nothing," Lady Winthrop replied. "I observe. Now, I believe Lord Harrington wished to speak with you in the library after dinner. Don't keep the poor man waiting." Theodora found Zachary where Lady Winthrop had predicted, standing by the library fireplace, his expression thoughtful as he gazed into the flames. He turned at her entrance, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. "Theodora, your financial problems appear to be solved," she said, moving to stand beside him. Lady Winthrop can be quite formidable when she sets her mind to something. "So I've discovered," he agreed with a chuckle. "Though I must admit, I'm still in shock. It seems too simple a resolution after months of worry." "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see," she observed. "Especially when one is blinded by tradition and expectation." "Indeed." He took her hand, his expression growing serious. "But Lady Winthrop's generosity, while solving one problem, leaves another unresolved." "What problem is that?" "The problem of my heart," he said softly. "Which has been captured, quite thoroughly, by a woman who challenges my thinking, makes me laugh, and sees beyond my title to the man beneath." Theodora's breath caught. "Zachary? I know we've known each other only a short time," he continued, his voice earnest. "But some things don't require years to recognize. From our first conversation, I felt a connection with you that I've never experienced before. You're brilliant, forthright, and kind, everything I never knew I needed until I met you." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. "Theodora Osborne, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not for my title or my estate, but simply because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears blurred Theodora's vision as joy welled up within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary. Because I love the man you are, honorable, compassionate, and true." He rose and took her in his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and devotion. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his smile radiant. "Your aunt will be insufferably pleased with herself," he murmured. Theodora laughed softly. "She deserves to be. She saw what we needed before we did." "A remarkable woman," Zachary agreed. "Though not half as remarkable as her great niece." Outside, spring rain fell gently on Harrington Hall, washing away the last traces of winter and promising new beginnings. Inside, a new earl and his unexpected bride sealed their future with another kiss, both knowing that while their story had begun with practical concerns, it would continue with something far more precious, a union of hearts and minds that no fortune could buy and no title could enhance.